Hello, my name is Ted Lederer, and you're watching another episode of It's All About Art. And today we're at the Vancouver Island studio of marble sculptor Kent Laforme. Kent, thank you for having us at your studio today. What a fabulous place.
Well, this is modeled after where I worked in Italy, actually. It's the same type of studio.
How so?
And, well, in Italy there'll be sort of a big dirt field with all these small shelters with 3 walls, side by side by side by side.
Yes.
And every sculptor will rent a space like this, where I've sort of taken one section out of a big Italian studio and put it right here on the edge of the wood.
Your upcoming show, Altissimo, is June 2nd to 20th at the Elliott Lewis Gallery in Vancouver. So maybe let's just talk a little bit about the show. It's a major exhibition.
Over 10 months of work, and if you include the time it took to go to Italy, get the marble, arrange the shipping, do the transport, unload here, it's a major ordeal to put on a stone carving exhibition because there's so many logistical things to deal with outside of actually just making the art.
So all of this stone that we see around us, maybe tell us a little bit about the stone and where it's from, and then we'll talk about what you're doing with it.
Okay, well, it's all from Pietrasanta, Italy, in the Pruan Alps. I was there in October 2008, and I bought 34 tons, partially for this exhibition. I used to live there and work there, so I know people there, so I got to go straight up to the mountain and right to the quarry, to the source, and pick out my marble. And
so this marble is marble you chose?
I chose it all, yeah. These big blocks are statuario marble, and they're from Mount Altissimo, which is the name of my exhibition.
Okay.
And that mountain is known as Michelangelo's mountain. So the mountain has that mystique of his history to it.
How do you get 34 tons of stone from Altissimo, Italy, over to...
Well, in Italy, when you're over there, it's easy because they're set up to handle stone because of the industry. So they have trucks running down the mountains, right to the crate makers, right to container ports, and it all arrives in Vancouver, and then it gets here and you're like, now what do I do? So we had to put it on a barge, bring a barge over to Vancouver Island. It had to go to independent contractor, and they had to unload the whole container on flatbed trucks. Then we had to bring flatbed trucks up here with 10-ton cranes and unload it individually. So it actually is more expensive to move things from Vancouver to Victoria than Italy, Vancouver.
So Ken, tell us, we have the exhibition June 2nd to 20th. Tell us a little bit about what's going to be in the exhibition and what you're doing with the work.
Okay, well, the work is it's mainly an interpretation of different fabrics and stone. I'm using sort of mundane objects like t-shirts, handkerchiefs, socks, pillowcases, sometimes in conjunction with another object. And it's sort of I think there, you know, in neoclassical sculpture and the Renaissance, drapery was taken to such extremes.
Yes.
And I've always wanted to do some work that sort of referenced that period of sculpture. And, but I also wanted to do a body of work that referenced the mountain, rather than all the work that has come out of the mountain and been carved over the last 400 years, but the mountain itself, and that's been the lifeblood of the marble industry for so long. So I wanted to try to combine those two facets of drapery with the mountain and create a new body of work based on that. And I think the t-shirts, things like that, when they're arranged, they create a landscape and a human history. There's an element of pop art almost because of the use of mundane objects, everyday objects.
The everyday.
Yeah, so that's sort of an element of pop, and then it's sort of mixing genres with almost like neoclassical drapery. So it really brings together a span of about 400 years into a small collection of work.
Well, and it takes something very traditional and uses it in a very contemporary way. And yet your techniques, I mean, you're doing this by hand and with power tools, much the same way that people have been sculpting for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, we joke around sometimes. We say, what's the difference between someone carving a block of stone 400 years ago and someone doing it today? And I guess today we have better tools, but the essence of the process is pretty much the same. It's reductive sculpture. You're just removing material and trying to get to the finished product. And there's no shortcuts even today. I mean, my work, because it's detailed, you can't get a machine in there, so it's all working by hand. So it's a really traditional process.
And very, very labor intensive.
Very labor intensive, yeah, very, the little piece that takes a long time just because there's so many stages to carving the piece. When you start out with the block, you've got a hammer and a chisel or a saw and you're cutting away, and then you're using pneumatic tools and carving, and then, comes the rub down where you're sanding it. And sanding marble, you start with a file and then go to 40 grit and 80 grit, 120 grit, 150 grit, 220, 400, and there's just so many stages. It feels a little endless. And
Right. You explained a little bit about the forms and the drapery forms taking on a landscape feel.
I started doing landscape work with water pieces in '93, and I've always done that. And I wanted to do actual land pieces like mountains, but landscapes using land, like using stone. And there's an influence there. It's not a visual influence that relates to my work, but Isamu Noguchi's sort of slab pieces were like altars or landscapes, and they certainly had a big influence on me, especially with the water pieces. But with this body work, the fabric landscapes, I was more interested in the landscape of a discarded object. You know, like taking a shirt off and you just see it laying there, and there's that absence of the figure and that human history that I sort of wanted to memorialize. And I also like the fact that it's so insignificant. It's just such a discarded object, and I sort of like juxtaposing the time and care it takes to memorialize something in marble, you know, something so fleeting. And
It's an interesting context to memorialize something. And you really are doing that. I've never really thought of it that way, other than when you see a memorial, say, in a cemetery.
Well, that's the use of stones in North America. At least we don't have that sculptural tradition, so our familiarity with stones are really graveyards and cemeteries. And Isamu Noguchi, he talked about stone as a congealment of time, whether it's a grave marker marking the time of one's life, or a stone itself, you know, as a sculpture, just, you know, the thousands of years it's come into being and formed, the geological process that happened to make it what it is.
Right.
I mean, and with marble, it was bottom of the ocean. It was thousands and thousands of years of sea creatures dying and building up on the ocean floor, and then millennia of time and pressure turning this into marble. So it's gone through a great sort of the evolutionary soup, so to speak, that's crystallized and become this marble. So it's, you know, if you think about it, there's sort of something profound about working with stone when you have an awareness of what that stone really is. I mean, we think of rocks as rocks, but if you go one step further, it's a pretty amazing material.